fired upon. Yarbrough was in the third car behind the president's limousine and said, "Seemed to me that at least 2 of the shots came from our right rear. I don't know where the third one came from." The police, of course, had spread out a giant dragnet around the city searching for the assassin or assassins. There was a report that a man and a woman had been seen scrambling off a walkway near an underpass where the motorcade was going. One man being sought is described as a white man, about 30, slender build, weighing about 165 pounds. Apparently, the president was shot with a .30 rifle, undoubtedly with a telescopic sight on it. Let me repeat, President Kennedy is dead, killed by an assassin in Dallas. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, 45 years old, in his first term in office. Shot in a motorcade going through downtown Dallas. Texas Governor John Connally, also wounded by an assassin. Our best information at the moment is that the Texas governor is still in surgery. We do not know anything further about his condition. Acting White House News Secretary Malcolm Kilduff in Dallas says that President Kennedy died of a gunshot wound he received in the brain. Bob Clark said that he had seen blood on the president's head as the shots rang out, and Mr. Kennedy slumped into the arms of his wife in the back of the car. The Kennedys had reached Dallas just a little while before that. This morning they were in Fort Worth, Texas. It's a 2-day swing that they had planned through 5 cities in Dallas, in Texas, scheduled to deliver a speech this afternoon in Dallas. That's where the president was heading at the time that the assassin found his mark. He was due to deliver a speech in Austin, Texas tonight. At the Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas, Texas, all the best of medical attention was given to the president. Immediately their top medical people called in on emergency service. Priests brought in to administer the last rites of the Roman Catholic Church. And it was from the priests who came from the emergency room at Parkland Hospital that he received the first word that the president was dead. Out in the area where the assassination occurred, the police have picked up a foreign-made rifle. It's reported also that sheriff's officers are questioning a young man picked up on the scene. Vice President Johnson walked into the Parkland Hospital. It seemed that he had been injured possibly by a rifle bullet. We have word now that Lyndon Johnson, the new President of the United States, had left the hospital where President Kennedy died. Johnson accompanied by his wife. They would not answer any questions in the seriousness of the situation. What is the world thinking about this horrible catastrophe that's happened in the United States today? Let's find out from London. Bill Sheehan in London.
Prime Minister Sir Alec Douglas Hume hadn't heard the news up until about 20 minutes ago. He left number 10 Downing Street less than 2 hours ago. He has planned to spend the weekend at the Duke of Norfolk's estate, which is about 60 miles outside London. That's a 2-hour drive at least in the Friday night traffic. Therefore, unless the Prime Minister had the radio on, he did not hear the news because spokesman at number 10 Downing Street hadn't been able to contact him. The British generally first heard the news of the shooting about 50 minutes ago on a BBC News bulletin. But the man on the street hustling home after work or staying downtown for some late early Christmas shopping hasn't heard even yet. The BBC announcement that the president definitely was dead came exactly 20 minutes ago. An announcement following a direct report from a BBC correspondent in Washington. After the announcement that the president had died, there was a long period of silence, perhaps 2 minutes, after which a BBC announcer came in and said, "You'll pardon the period of silence, but we're trying to compose ourselves and decide what to do next. There followed some music on a guitar, and further developments have been broadcast minute by minute as they became available.
Bill Sheehan, this is Don Gardner in New York. What time is it now over in London?
Right, it's 8 minutes of 8 in London, which means that the announcement of the President's death came at 7:30 London time.
How is President Kennedy regarded on the streets of London by the people?
Well, there's no question about it. He was the most popular president. I wouldn't say more popular than General Eisenhower, but popular for completely different reasons. Popular for the same reason that Franklin Roosevelt was popular. And a sun-glazed look is what you get from people who are hearing the news for the first time, the few that I have seen in the last 40 minutes or so.
How about over at the Foreign Office? How was the President regarded?
The President was highly regarded by Foreign Secretary Rat Butler. He, surprisingly enough, had a great rapport with the former Prime Minister Harold Macmillan. Mr. Macmillan, although he's almost 70 years old and has been in government for a long time, might have been expected to have a lot of differences with a young man who assumed so much of power and such an important place in the free world. But I heard Harold Macmillan say a couple of months ago to a group of American reporters, "You're very lucky to have a man like Jack. He's quite a remarkable young man indeed." And you could see the admiration was sincere and not just something he was telling American reporters.
That report from Bill Sheehan over in London is more concerning the assassination today. Mrs. Kennedy, may I please emphasize that Mrs. Kennedy was not shot. Mr. Kennedy lived for about an hour, and then came that official announcement that the President was dead. John F. Kennedy, the fourth United States President to be slain while in office. He was shot about 1:25 Eastern Standard Time, rushed immediately to the hospital into surgery, lived about 35 minutes, pronounced dead at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 54 minutes ago. Mrs. Kennedy was not harmed. The White House associates refused to make any comment concerning her condition. We received this word on the Moscow radio. The commentator, speaking in mournful tones, told of the assassination of President Kennedy, then told the Russians, and I quote the Moscow radio, "It is said he has been murdered by the extreme right-wing elements." That is a statement only from Moscow radio. He was assassinated on the streets of Dallas, Texas today. Apparently, a high-powered rifle. Sheriff's officers have in custody a young man. Police going out in a hunt for someone else who possibly was in association with that assassin when the bullets were fired at the President's bubble-top limousine at 1:25 Eastern Time this afternoon. Ending the President's life, the bullet had lodged in his brain at 2 o'clock, 55 minutes ago. Vice President Lyndon Johnson has left the hospital in company with Mrs. Johnson. He is now making plans to be sworn into office. He will be the 36th President of the United States. For comments on the situation, ABC's Quincy Howell. Quincy.
As a fellow citizen of Boston and a fellow graduate of Harvard College, naturally, I feel a special grief at the loss of the President under these conditions. It's hard to put into words and to order in logical form the emotions that stir me at any rate, and I'm sure millions of other Americans now. This assassination perhaps recalls more than any other the assassination of President McKinley. I think that was the last time that a president in office was shot and killed in the United States. It also is a reflection, too, at the present time of the violence of the world we live in. A violence that is not confined to the United States, but that runs strong here, too. Political passions are such that men will go out and murder a fine, young, able president, a leader like President Kennedy, with the idea that somehow they are doing good, that they are somehow ministering to a cause they believe in. I think that is perhaps the grimmest feature of this whole thing. I do not know. No one knows who these men were or who the man was that pulled the trigger that killed the president. Perhaps he was mentally deranged, like the Choglos, the anarchist who shot and killed McKinley. Perhaps he was also deranged in another way, like Zangara, who almost succeeded in murdering President-elect Franklin Roosevelt. But I would think that in this case, it was the act of relatively sane people. And that is perhaps the most horrible feature of this tragic day. Quincy Howe, ABC New York.
Thank you, Quincy. Standing by in Washington, two prominent members of Congress. For their observations, we switch now to John Walson, ABC, Washington.
The leader of the Republicans in the Senate, Everett McKinley Dirksen, has just commented on the death of President Kennedy, saying that some things are simply so incredible that they leave one speechless. Senator Dirksen said he'd known Mr. President Kennedy for over 14 years. He had seen him only last Tuesday, and then he was so affable and agreeable and full of life. And Senator Everett Dirksen, the Republican leader of the Senate, had this to say: "It suddenly comes this mortal blow that strikes him cold in death. I say it's an incredible thing, and my heart goes out to the family, and frankly, I'm a little bewildered by this turn of events, as I know the nation and the whole wide world will be. So first, my sincere sympathy to the entire Kennedy family, and in the language of the chaplain as we had a prayer, in the hope that transfusion might infuse recovery, that the nation still stands and the nation will live."
That was Senate Republican leader Everett McKinley Dirksen on the death of the president.
With Senator Dirksen at this moment is the Democratic leader of the Senate, the majority leader, Senator Mike Mansfield of Montana, and here is his statement on the president's death.
The passing of John Fitzgerald Kennedy is not only a tragedy for the nation which he so ably represented, but is, I think, also a mark upon the respectability and the responsibility of some of our citizens. This good, this decent, this kindly man, this harassed man who had so much on his shoulders and received from some people so little in the way of support in return, this man is now gone to his reward. And I will miss him as a personal friend. The nation will miss him as a great president, and the world will miss him as a great leader. One of the fondest memories I can recall is the cooperation and the support which the distinguished senator from Illinois, Mr. Dirksen, the minority leader of the Senate, gave to the President of the United States, a Democrat, time and time again, when the interests of the nation were at stake. And I know how grateful he was to you for the many contributions you made, and I'm just as grateful, and the nation is too. Words are useless to express one's true feelings at a moment like this.
A person's perplexity is just too great in a tragic moment like this.
That statement by the Senate Democratic leader Mike Mansfield and the comment at the end by Senate Republican leader Everett Dirksen. On that earlier report, Vice President Lyndon Johnson had suffered a heart attack during or after today's incident. Senator Mansfield, when I told him this just a moment ago, telephoned Ralph Dungan at the White House. An immediate check was made, and the report from the White House on the story that Vice President Johnson suffered a heart attack is that it is not so. This report not true. This is John Rolfson, ABC of the Senate, switching you now to John Scali in Hawaii.
The plane carrying Secretary Rusk and 5 other cabinet officers to Japan has turned back and will return to Honolulu prior to flying back to the United States immediately. Word of the attempted assassination of the President was relayed to Secretary Rusk by Admiral Felt as soon as it happened. Felt is Commander-in-Chief of all American forces in the Pacific. Admiral Felt talked by emergency phone to Rusk, who immediately decided to call off the scheduled goodwill visit to Japan. The plane is due to return to Hickam Air Force Base at 10:30 a.m. Honolulu time or 3:30 p.m. New York time. Under the circumstances, Rusk will want to be back at his State Department desk to personally command the nation's foreign policy. It has long been a cardinal principle of the Secretary that moments of deep emergency, when the nation's attention is focused elsewhere, provide a tempting opportunity for the Soviets to make some kind of move. The plane on which Mr. Rusk was flying also carries White House Press Secretary Pierre Salinger, Treasury Secretary Dillon, Commerce Secretary Hodges, Interior Secretary Udo, Agriculture Secretary Freeman, and Labor Secretary Work. This is John Scali, ABC, Honolulu.
The President of the United States is dead, assassinated today in a burst of gunfire in Dallas as his motorcade moved through the city. Texas Governor John Connally shot down with him. Latest word from Dallas says that Governor Connally underwent an operation for a gunshot wound in the chest at 1:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. Further information on the Texas governor we do not have at the moment. Mrs. Kennedy was not hurt. The President is dead. He was 46, his first term in the White House, when assassinated. Mrs. Kennedy was with him when he was shot. She cried, oh no, grabbed him as he fell. Mrs. Connally was also in the same car. She held her husband as he slumped to the floor of the car. Let's pause 5 seconds for station identification.
This is KRAK, Sacramento.
This is Don Gardner in the ABC Radio Newsroom in New York. What is the world thinking of now in this hour of tragedy for the United States? We've heard from London just a few moments ago and ABC's Bill Sheehan. Now online, the circuit to Berlin. And here is Ben Lacey. Ben?
President Kennedy's death has left the German nation limp. Chancellor Erhard's visit to Washington, scheduled to start on Sunday, will surely be postponed. Erhard had counted on this meeting with Kennedy to give new impetus to a campaign to speed up integration of the common market and increase Atlantic cooperation along the lines that both men discussed when they met in West Germany earlier this year. I can't begin to explain the shock that this is having on the Berliners. I keep seeing those people massed in front of City Hall last June to hear President Kennedy tell them, I am a Berliner. Nothing could have given them more courage than those words. Now this tragic news of President's death has sunk this city into grief. This is Ben Lacey in Berlin.
The world around us mourns the loss of our president. Vice President Johnson has now started making his plans to be sworn into office. He has left the hospital. The Vice President, though he seemed to have been wounded, was not hurt in the assassination of President Kennedy today. The president died in the operating room at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, Texas, 1 hour and 6 minutes ago. He lived 35 minutes after the assassin's bullet crashed into his body. The hospital has told us that Mr. Kennedy died of a bullet lodged in his brain. Mrs. Kennedy was there when the president passed away. The last rites of the Roman Catholic Church have been given to the president. It was from the priests who administered the last rites that we heard the first word that the president had died. An additional word came from down in Dallas. And then confirmation from Washington that the president was dead. Vice President Johnson, our next president, was not injured in the assassination of President Kennedy today. There's been no immediate word on when Mr. Johnson will take the oath of office. Can be expected to be administered quite shortly. Mr. Kennedy died at Parkland Hospital. It was a futile, frantic effort to try to save his life. Lying wounded in the same hospital, the Texas governor, John Connally, cut down in the same fusillade. Connally and his wife were riding with the president and Mrs. Kennedy. As the bullet crashed into the president's body, the First Lady jumped up, grabbed her husband, cradled him as he slumped down, his blood-smeared head in her arms. The presidential limousine under police and Secret Service escort rushed to the hospital. It still took them several minutes to get there. The Texas governor slumped in his seat beside the president, Mrs. Connally traveling in the same car, cradling her husband. An unprecedented dragnet of the city of Dallas out. The police believe that the fatal shots were fired by a white man about 30, slender build, weighing about 165 pounds, standing 5 feet 10 inches tall. Murder weapon reportedly a .30-30 rifle. One was found, a foreign make, right at the scene where it is believed the assassination took place. The police have one person in custody. They're questioning him. This is a sad time for our nation. We've heard reports from here, there, and everywhere around the world. There'll be more reactions coming into our ABC newsroom just shortly. But once again, I would like to repeat for those who may have tuned in just a little bit late, President Kennedy died of an assassin's bullet at 2 o'clock Eastern Time this afternoon, 1 hour and 9 minutes ago. How did the news reach Hyannisport? Up there where the president's mother and the father are. A workman told the president's father and mother in Hyannisport today that the president had been shot while visiting Dallas. The workman had been listening to the radio. That was the first report that the president's father and mother had of it when they came to them. At the United Nations, the Secretary General, Wu Thant, is about to speak, to take you to the UN. To the United Nations and Secretary General Wu Thant, who in this horrible hour for the United States wishes to speak for the world and the United Nations. The Secretary General has called on all the delegates. Possible that despite the building of warless and the president is stricken President Nixon driving the hospital, trying to get the president reported out of range of further gunfire and danger. Since where they got blue bubble top, limousine, the transparent plastic roof of the car, according to this report, had been removed for the motorcade. Gunman. There's late word that shortly home to Washington, and undoubtedly to lie in state at the White House for a period of time. At the moment, plans are being made for swearing in Vice President Lyndon Johnson. He, according to the laws of the land, is the normal person who would take over in the event of the loss of the President of the United States. No details have been announced as to when the Vice President will be sworn in. He and Mrs. Johnson have left the hospital under heavy guard. He is now the President of the United States. Soon after the President Kennedy, was assassinated in Dallas, a white man in his mid-20s, according to this report, arrested in the Riverside section of Fort Worth in the shooting of a Dallas policeman. This man was described as black curly hair, wearing a red shirt. He denied that he was connected with the assassination of the President. Now let me call back to mind for just a moment this rather cryptic report that came in off the wire just a few moments ago, which had a dateline of Dallas, Texas, that a Secret Service agent and a Dallas policeman were shot and killed today some distance from the area where the President was assassinated. Now this story in from Fort Worth, which says that a Dallas policeman was shot soon after the President was assassinated. Whether these two stories had any association with the assassination of the President today is hard to say, but they are rather cryptic. There is an air of mystery about it. John Scali is a state that's out in Honolulu. He's been traveling with Secretary of State Dean Rusk. Has reported to us that 6 members of the President's cabinet who were on their way to Japan when the President was assassinated today. They were an hour and a half out of Honolulu. The cabinet members advised of the death of the President, ordered their pilot to immediately turn back. They'll be back in Washington certainly by tomorrow. The President's cabinet, those 6 members, were going to meet members of the Japanese cabinet. In that party, Secretary of State Rusk, Secretary of Commerce Luther Hodges, Secretary of Labor Willard Wirtz, the Secretary of the Interior Stuart Udall, and the Secretary of Agriculture Orville Freeman. They were traveling with their wives. They are now on their way back to Washington. In the nation's capital, on Capitol Hill, there is reaction from one of the members of the Senate. The Democratic Senator from West Virginia, longtime member of Congress, Senator James Randolph. Here is his report from Washington.
President John Kennedy is gone from the position of Chief Executive of the United States, but he will be remembered always by Americans. I think by freedom-loving peoples throughout the world. I was in the Senate participating in the debate on the Library Services Act. Senator Morse, Senator Crowley and I were discussing the bill, and it was at that moment with the President's brother, Ted Kennedy, presiding over the Senate that the news of the assassin's bullet, the possible death of the President, was brought to the chamber, and Mr. Riddell spoke to the presiding officer, Ted Kennedy. The Senate recessed, and then we waited quietly and fearfully for what, in a few moments, although it seemed like hours, brought the word of the President's passing. West Virginians knew John Kennedy very, very well. I think West Virginians loved him, and not because he was a Democrat, not perhaps even because he was a president, but they came to know him as a young man who seemed, they believed, to have them at heart. Their problems were his problems, and he went through our valleys, over our hills, and he talked to these people, and they had confidence in him.
I think I speak for West Virginians, not in any partisan sense, when I say they will be more than saddened by his death. It will be, in a sense, a tragedy to them. It's difficult to say more. I shall remember him as a friend. I shall cherish him, as will all Americans, I believe, of good intent, as a truly inspired.
You guys get married, and I hope you have a lot of happiness, because I know it'll make me happy to see you guys happy. So goodbye, not you. Bye-bye. I got PS here. Well, I was going to call for another customer real quick, Mike, so I'm going to tell you this, that till Don Elliott and Evelyn, I wish them all the happiness in the world, and I'm sorry that I can't be there at their wedding. And tell them for me that I hope that you guys will follow in their footsteps and show the younger generation that people in your age, which is not old, people like you can remarry and have just as wonderful a life.